Our webinar today, Identity Access Management 101 for MSPs. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get going here. Can't hear us? We are talking right now, so you want to make sure that volume is up, speakers are connected. If you have any issues with the platform, Google Chrome is our preferred platform that should work well with this webinar setup here. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box anytime. We'll try to get back to them at the end of our session here. Please feel free to click on reactions, open the links in related content boxes. I promise there's no fishes in here. And also this webinar is recorded, so you will get a recording in a follow-up email within a couple of days. With that, I'm really excited to have Michael Roth here with me for the webinar today. He's the CEO and founder of Evo Security. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Good. Hey, Rafi, glad to be here.
Glad to have you. My name is Raffael Marty. I'm the general manager for cybersecurity over here at ConnectWise. So Mike, we want to talk a little bit about IAM, Identity and Access Management. It's such a big word, but I think you're going to talk a little bit about what the importance is of IAM, how it works, what is it, maybe demystifying a little bit what this big acronym really stands for, and then also giving our MSPs that are listening today a little bit of an insight into, well, how do you implement an IAM project, and how in the end, which is top of mind for everybody, how do you make money with this thing? So I guess let's kick it off, Mike. Tell us a little bit about what is identity and access management.
Yeah, so really excited to be here and explain this. This is a subject that I've been studying for well over a decade at this point, and it's kind of simple. So IAM is a subcategory of cybersecurity, and underneath the IAM umbrella, and IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. So it's effectively two components, two bigger components rolled up under that one acronym. And typically what I've observed out in the market at the enterprise level, at sort of the SMB level, and what I think is appropriate for managed IT services is to kind of think of it as these two buckets you see here. So the I in IAM really stands for identity management. So this is going to be the piece where you're going to try and validate that people are who they say they are when they're trying to get into their workstation or a server or a web application. So in other words, I could just call that logging into stuff. That's the I, and you really want to make sure that that's the people that are logging into that stuff they are a source of truth. So that's all tied into the identity management or IDP system, and we'll talk about it in a minute a little bit more. But in practice, this means multi-factor authentication, means single sign-on, directory services, which are going to hold the source of truth. User and endpoint device management, and how you provision those users in and out of new employees or users coming on board to whether it's the MSP or their company, and then also when they exit. And then in addition to that, it's all of the integrations that this type of identity management tool has to connect to, which we'll display on the next slide. The other bucket is what's called, or the A in IAM, is privilege access management. And you've probably seen this, the acronym PAM. And so basically what that's saying is, look, once you're inside of these things, what should you be able to do there? So I really call that just gaining access to stuff. This is really controlled by roles and groups and policies, different types of vaulting, especially when you're dealing with administrative credentials. And can you get into those endpoints or not? What things should you be able to run on a machine, whether you're an end user or an administrator? Do you have access to those folders? So I think this is a really good way to encapsulate IAM, these two buckets, and breaking it down.
Makes sense to me, yeah.
And really, so what does this mean like in practice? So here we are again, we've got these two buckets. And I wanted to just visually demonstrate that on the left, you have identity management again. So one thing you need to be concerned with is, okay, what are the threats that are actually trying to attack that source of truth? So you've seen a topic called identity threat detection and response. That's sort of a newer category of threat detection that's emerging. We talked about provisioning and how you can automate some of that stuff. But really, again, what identity management is doing is saying, okay, if you have at your company, your MSP or your customers, who is eligible or able to log into those endpoints, those web applications, and those network devices and appliances? All of these three different things require different sort of protocols and technologies that the identity provider or the identity platform should have inherently built in. So it's easy for you to roll this stuff out, easy for you to make that connection and start protecting all of these different devices and applications and appliances. And again, over on the PAM side, you want to know, okay, who controls all this stuff? So who should be the super admin? Who should be the admin? Who should have different sets of privileges? Is it a co-managed IT situation? Is it a fully managed IT situation? How do all those policies scale, and how do you group them and make sense out of all this stuff on the fly, day in and day out, when you're trying to manage your administration as an MSP, but also, what should your customers be able to do as well? So what comes to the forefront really quickly, and typically this capability is baked into the identity management platform, but sometimes is a standalone, and that's your role-based access control. So who should be able to do what and why as an administrator on behalf of your company and on behalf of all of your customers. And then from there, you, as mentioned before, you want to have sets of rules and policies that apply to the different types of endpoints that you manage and your web applications and your network devices and appliances. And for the record, these two categories are really huge. And what I've observed at the enterprise level and at the SMB level is that there could be really, really big platforms to try and accomplish a whole bunch of stuff. And then there could be several point solutions that could be used to accomplish the same or similar processes. So it just kind of depends where you are and who you're trying to protect.
So let me actually ask you a couple of additional questions here. You're hitting on a lot of very interesting areas, and I just want to clarify a few things. I have Active Directory, Azure or on-prem. How does that tie in here?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And I think it's a point of clarity that everyone needs to understand is that those directories, if you're using them, then you are electing that those directories are the sources of truth of identity for your users. So if you have an on-prem directory or Azure AD, and oftentimes we'll see our partners that we work with are maybe trying to transition from on-prem to Azure, and so there's Azure AD Connect, and so there's sort of this hybrid source of truth. And what the identity management platform should be doing is connecting to those directories. And that's in the previous slide I mentioned directory services. So you should have the ability to connect to those directories, and then the identity management platform should be able to absorb and have a live connection there. And therefore, when you're using the IDP or the identity management platform to connect to your workstations and your web apps and other VPNs, firewalls, et cetera, when the user goes to authenticate and gain and enter those endpoints or web apps or whatever it is, you are actually authenticating that user back through the identity management platform and then back through into the directory. So the source of truth and the real identity is verified. And that's also why I mentioned threats to those sources of truth, which is a real thing these days.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe to just reiterate, so someone that has Active Directory, the Evo security solution will tie into that Active Directory or whatever directory someone has. But if they actually don't have a directory, you also have a directory built in that can be used. So someone that is not using AD as a source of truth today for user information, they can still use the Evo security platform because there's a directory actually built in. Now, okay, so I have Active Directory, but it seems like what you just said, well, if I get on an endpoint, it checks that credentials against Active Directory. So what's happening now in the middle here with Evo? Like, what is it actually providing?
Yeah, so Evo, we call it the Evo Partner Identity Cloud. And so basically, Evo is a platform whereby you can say, okay, here are all of my sources of truth, and let's pull those into the Evo platform. Evo then takes over as the identity provider. So think of it as sort of a middleware or a kind of a layer where we have built all the really hard integrations into all of the things that you want to protect. And we have built all of the proper connections to all the sources of truth. And just doing that alone and all the thousands of little connections you have to make is actually extremely difficult to engineer. And so that's the value that our platform brings, is that we're giving you a very easy way to connect all that stuff, sync your sources of truth, and be able to roll that out very easily to your customers, to your own MSP, and then give you a centralized location where you can manage identity from one place and not have to bounce around everywhere, and provision those users in and out of the system very easily.
And so I guess if take what you just said and put it in some different words also, some of the value adds that the platform, the Evo platform provides, is that if I just have an endpoint and I need to authenticate from there, well, Active Directory would do that. But you're adding MFA to that. You're also adding SSO, that whole mix. You're also, instead of just protect that endpoint with credentials, right, like that Active Directory kind of does, well, now I can, as we can see here on the left-hand slide, well, you can also hook up web apps into that authentication stream that before you would have completely different credentials, and that's where SSO plays in as well, or network devices and other areas where you want to log in. Just wanted to kind of summarize that connective tissue between all these different components. The last question I have for you here, Mike, is the two of us have talked quite a bit about the user lifecycle management. Yeah. Can you talk about that just a little bit? Why that is important, and maybe what we might mean by user lifecycle? You talked about it a little bit before.
Yeah, I think the big thing there is that, from the perspective of a IT services provider, so you have technicians and people that are entering your organization and leaving your organization. You have a level of attrition that you need to manage, and I think that's pretty normal across every business. But how do you do that effectively and at scale? Historically, different solutions have offered a series of steps that you have to go and you have to undertake, or maybe everything's not centralized and connected. But what we've done at Evo is we said, hey, look, we're allowing you to create user groups inside of our platform. So if you have already created a group inside of AD, for example, you've already have things really well organized, where your tier 1, tier 2 technicians are. Those AD groups will sync into Evo automatically, and then you will have a mirrored group on Evo. So let's say someone leaves your organization, you can go to AD, you can remove them, put them in a different group, and then they are automatically deprovisioned from everything that they could possibly log into previously when they were in a group. So they're shut out. Everything is blocked, and they can no longer log in. Alternatively, we give the option where you could just go to that user and just click a toggle button, say MFA is off, and it will accomplish the same thing. They're out of everything. So we give some optionality and some as far as what is the actual situation. And the same thing applies for MSP customers. So same sort of user group functionality and turning MFA
and
off.
I think that's huge, right? That is, it's both from a time invested in trying to decommission these accounts. You have to go to all these different platforms and remove the user and disable them and whatnot. So it's time intensive, but it's also from a security perspective. If someone leaves, you want to turn them off from all your systems. Just a click of a button. That's really a huge, huge benefit of this platform. Well, thank you for that.
You bet. And I love that because it applies to, there's lots of different frameworks that are out there, but we tried really hard to adhere to the concept of least privilege. And I think that's squarely there. Yeah.
Also, you just kind of started talking about that, right? There's multiple reasons why you want IAM. Like one we just said, it's kind of operational efficiency. But from a security perspective, I think you have some stats here that are quite interesting of how identity management actually also protects the users from certain compromises and attacks.
Yeah, I think what's compelling to us and why we were passionate about building this platform specifically for managed IT services is we were looking across the landscape of where are cyber criminals focusing their attention, and historically it's been at the enterprise, and then it came kind of down to the mid-market enterprise, and then the lower enterprise, and now in the SMB. So the attack surface has been expanding, and all along that journey, the number one form of attack has been some type of social engineering. So that means maybe your credentials are getting phished. There's brute force attack attempts, man-in-the-middle attacks, which is basically someone trying to intercept an SMS text message to get your 6 digits for MFA, and more recently, push notification fatigue. So if you're getting a push notification to approve your identity, and the attacker can just hit it over and over and over and over again, and then you finally get annoyed and you say, okay, I just pushed this thing, and boom, now they're in, right? There are a lot we could talk about this for hours, but what's really interesting is that there's all sorts of cybersecurity platforms and solutions out there, but we are looking at nuts and bolts here, and we're saying that, look, if you don't have an IAM program, then you're missing the number one obvious form of attack, and we want to make that easy for you and painless for you to manage. And it should be a core part of your security stack. And the thing that I'll add there is that what cyber criminals are really trying to do is exploit trust. And what we see is that they're going to exploit trust between people. So they're going to say, you've heard or maybe read about your boss, the CEO sends a text message to an employee and says, hey, can you send me those credentials or that bank account number? Why don't you just enter it over here and go to this link? Oh yeah, sure, okay. Well, they're exploiting trust between the employer and the employee. The same sort of concept can happen between a person and machine or a person and application. And so these are different methods of exploitation. And that's really, to me, why the concept of zero trust is so important, is because you're saying, hey, never trust that stuff to happen, because this is the number one form of attack that typically leads to worse things. So IAM, if you haven't thought about it holistically, this is ultimately, in my opinion, the core reason why you need to do something about this and pay attention.
And I think you just kind of said it, but also, I guess, putting it into a slightly different framework, right? Like you have here is the cyber defense matrix. So for the people that haven't seen the defense matrix yet, I really encourage you to Google it and look at it a little more closely. But basically what you have here is the 5 categories of the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And then broken out by the different types of things that you want to protect, right? Devices, applications, networks, data, and users. And there's all kinds of applications for this cyber defense matrix. You can map the coverage of your security tools in here, right? Like if you have a bunch of different security tools, which areas do you actually cover? Mike, what did you do here with identity management, the matrix?
Yeah, well, the first thing I did is I put purple X's because that's our logo color. But the second thing is, and you'll notice I didn't put X's in that middle line so you can read pre-event and post-event, but there should be some X's in the network row. But basically, what I wanted to demonstrate is like, look, this is where IAM comes into play, and to varying degrees. But yeah, devices, applications, networks, data, users, all things that are going to be managed or configured or connected to inside of an IAM application or platform. And what it's going to allow you to do, so once you connect to to all of your endpoints. You've rolled out MFA. You've connected to all of your web applications. The most common way to do that is via SAML. And I should mention that devices is going to, or your endpoints is going to be through perhaps your RMM tool or something like that, where you use us with a script and you can roll out to thousands of machines. So once you do all of that stuff, and for network, for example, like VPN or firewall, we do have a self-hosted Radius server that we manage on your behalf. So you're not trying to manage, authentication yourself. And you can connect to different network devices and appliances. So you're going to be able to see all that stuff. You're going to be able to log that information. And so, this can go into your SIM or SOC. So you're trying to identify what are these users doing and what maybe appears to be weird behavior or something that's out of the ordinary. And then, so that's kind of the first piece. The second piece is obviously what the IAM platform does is you are protecting these things, right? These devices, applications, networks with multi-factor authentication. And if something looks out of band or sort of weird or anomalous, you are detecting that thing. So perhaps there is a breach. You just notice that, hey, this individual or this employee tried to authenticate 5 times in 10 seconds. Well, that's a little weird. And then all of a sudden they're in. Well, we should probably investigate that to make sure we didn't just witness or detect a breach, right? And then we call that individual, we say, hey, what did you see here? And like, oh, I wasn't trying to authenticate at all. Well, did you click approve on the push notification? Well, yeah, I did. Okay, yeah, we've got a breach here potentially. Let's look into it. So, and you're going to be able to observe that and see that on the device, the application, and then also with the user behavior. And then if a breach occurred, it also helps you respond to this breach, right? So you can immediately then go to that individual, turn MFA on or remove the individual if perhaps the MFA was off for some reason. It gives you the ability to take action, remove the device or the endpoint. You could actually switch that off as well and say, okay, nobody can gain access to this device. So you can take action to shut down any further damage that may have been caused. I didn't put any X's in recover because I think that's a little bit more people-centric, but this is where the IAM platform kind of comes into play if there was a breach.
Makes sense to me, yeah. Now, looking at, so we just talked about sort of the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? See how it maps in there. A control framework that a lot of MSPs are following is the CIS, the Center for Internet Security's benchmarking guidelines. And basically, this is a set of controls that are recommended to be applied across an organization. Tell us a little bit more about how IAM is in this kind of context of this framework as well.
Yeah, so it applies basically across the board on every framework that's out there. So you can't, in general, you can't implement any individual framework without IAM coming into play on some level. And what I show here is just kind of the overall, like you just mentioned, Rafi, the overall sort of meaning behind CIS. I really like it because it does combine a lot of other frameworks and tries to encapsulate things into one place to go. But ultimately, there are a couple of different controls where IAM really comes into play, and that's in Control 5 and in Control 6. Control 5 is really going to be about how are you managing authorization and user accounts and those credentials. Who should be able to do what and who should have access to what. You want to make sure that you have unique passwords, you're disabling dormant accounts, you're maintaining inventory. You have one centralized place to manage this stuff. In Control 6, this is really getting a little bit more into privileged access management, whereas Control 5 is more identity focused. And you can see here in the title and also the security function, require MFA for externally exposed applications, also establish an access granting process. So you could argue that there's a little bit more PAM in this one or a little bit more identity in this one. It all kind of converges. This one talks about MFA and SSO, you can see in 6.3. So these are the two controls that I think are most important. If you were to really dig into all of the controls, what we found is that on the identity side, controls 1, 2, 5, and 6, and then 3, 4, and 6 over on the PAM side are relevant and important. And underneath all of those controls are, NIST and Cloud Security Alliance and HIPAA and all sorts of other frameworks. So really, you can't do proper security on anything today without having an IAM plan in place.
Awesome. Now, I guess burning question for a lot of the MSPs is like, all right, if I do this, I probably want to secure myself. I guess that's what you have here on the left-hand side. And then how does that apply to the customers as well? Is it exactly the same? Basically, you're just rolling me think about that.
Yeah, this is what we've simplified and how we launched our business is we said, okay, the first thing that you need to do as an MSP is get your house in order. That's lock down and put MFA on all your workstations, your web apps, and your network devices and appliances. You also want to make sure you're doing that for your customers, right? So you're basically doing the exact same exercise for all of your customers, locking down the same stuff. But there's an interesting problem that emerges, what we've noticed with other solutions out there, and that is that once you do that, unfortunately, you have to figure out, okay, well, how do I log into all of my customers securely? And so we've seen sharing of administrative credentials for workstations and servers and other tools that might be rotating those things, but ultimately result in copying and pasting and sharing. And who gets the MFA code? Where does it live? And so what we invented was a way to completely eliminate that. We said, look, nobody should know what the administrative credentials are, and even if they wanted to know, they shouldn't be able to access them. The administrator should just be able to log in to any one of the workstations under any one of their customers as themselves, so they're using their own MSP credentials, so that when they do that, they're authenticating their true identity back through Evo, which is connected to the source of truth. They get a MFA prompt. The administrator gets a direct MFA prompt, which again authenticates back to the source of truth, and then boom, they're in the machine. So we believe that this is the first step into implementing a proper consolidated IAM strategy for your company and your customers.
A little bit more here as well, and a couple of the steps here. Anything additional you want to point out here that's relevant, I guess?
Yeah, I would say, so how do you help your MSP and your customers with IAM? So the previous slide was sort of a visual representation, but I think what you need to do first to get started with implementing an IAM program is you say, okay, what at your MSP do you need to protect? What are your critical resources? Identify those. Make sure that you have a proper list and that you're keeping track of all that, which I'm assuming everyone does. And then say, okay, what customers are most likely to need IAM now? And so you're saying, okay, well, how can I generate revenue? How can I make money off of IAM that's exciting and that's attractive? And you can do that by figuring out, okay, who are the compliance-driven or the regulatory-driven customers? And then you can move on to the rest of your customers later. And I think the way to approach it is you got to build a practical business plan on how you want to roll out to your customer base. And then find an IAM partner like Evo, for example, that might make sense for your needs. And you should expect that partner to give you sales materials and enablement materials so that you don't have to do a bunch of heavy lifting and selling. And then those materials should be able to explain the ROI. Look, this is protecting against the #1 common threat. You need to do this for insurance reasons, regulation, compliance, and this type of tool solves all of that. And so from there, how do you generate revenue? We just kind of mentioned that, but the first thing that we would recommend is to try and consolidate tooling. We've observed that there are lots of smaller tools out there, and that creates friction. It creates more time, and therefore can be sort of a cost center as opposed to a profit center. So think about how you can consolidate tooling. Think about how you can add this as a line item in your security package. We see very attractive margins that our partners have implemented, and it's been a really attractive ROI for them. But ultimately, you need to figure out what's going to fit your customer base and what's best for your business plan and your strategy. And sometimes you'll need to create incentive plans to get your customers started and just make sure that you're making it easy for them to get to yes, right? And then as soon as you see that working, build an aggressive rollout plan and get to work. And that's why Evo's here, and that's why we've partnered with ConnectWise.
This is awesome. Thank you. I think the last couple of slides really kind of driving home that, look, it's a security problem, right? We need to plug these holes. It's a operational efficiency, like we talked in the beginning, right? With the decommissioning process, for example. But then it's also a revenue opportunity for MSPs to go out there and create additional revenue streams by having this kind of setup for their customers as well. With that, we're getting to the end of the webinar here. Please have a look at the poll that you see right now, if you mind answering that. And I have a couple of questions that came in while we were talking here. The first one is that, what is the relationship between Evo and ConnectWise? I guess I'll take that one. It's at ConnectWise, an ecosystem of products and services to our MSPs. So they can come to us, and we have a broad set of solutions that help MSPs secure themselves and secure their customers. And as part of that effort, we don't own and we can't own all of the different capabilities. And that's where we entered into a relationship with Evo Security, where we are reselling the offering of Evo to the market. So we are strategic partners in that journey. The second question that I thought was really interesting was, how quickly can I roll out Evo's platform, Mike? Is this like in identity management? When I started my security career as a consultant, identity management was a very lucrative business because it was a big project, right? And then you did all kinds of projects around it. How long does it take to roll out this Evo thing?
Yeah, so that is a great question, and I will tell a bit of a story. So we had a breakout session at IT Nation Secure, and one of our newer partners had mentioned that they allocated basically the entire weekend to rolling out Evo and getting things set up. He kind of stood up in front of everybody, and he said, "But I was done in 15 minutes." And so I was standing at the podium. I was kind of saying, like, okay, well, what a great advocate. I guess, should I be done now? But it was, what I will say is that if you are trying to roll out Evo, sync a directory that you use for your MSP or your customer, and then roll out Evo to all of your workstations is very, very, very fast. If you are trying to connect to web applications, particularly that have SAML, that process can be a little slower, and that's very normal. There's nothing that Evo can control about that. We try to make it as easy as possible, but really it's up to the third-party web application on how they're set up, if anything arises. But overall, it's very quick, and it's mostly painless. And the cool thing is that we have spent a lot of time and effort on building phenomenal support desk and relationship with ConnectWise. So if there's any issues, everyone is well trained. You can go to them, and we've shared our knowledge and our know-how. So you should be well supported.
Awesome, great. With that, we're at the end here. Thank you very much again, Mike, for joining us today to talk a little bit about IAM and educating our partner base on what that is. If you want to stay in touch with us, go check out our website. If you go to connectwise.com/webinars, you will see a whole bunch of other webinars that we have out there across not just cybersecurity, but also around business management and also and UMM, but also in general about how do you sell with more profit and things like that. If you go to connectwise.com/cybersecurity, you will find more about our cybersecurity offerings, where you find the IAM offerings as well. With that, thank you very much for joining, and until soon.
Thanks.